Good afternoon, everyone. It is Wednesday, June 15th, 2022 at 3 o'clock p.m. And that means it is time for Women in Business. I should tell you, it is hotter than it's just really hot here and humid. So I apologize for the hair. It's kind of doing its own little boofy thing today, and it just kind of is what it is. And we're just going to let it be what it is because there ain't nothing else we can do with it. But yeah, it's really hot here. And I know you people that live in the 108, 110, 114 degree temperature areas are going, oh, 92 is nothing. That's like cool. But for us in Northern Michigan, that's really hot. So that would also explain why I'm not really working with a whole lot of light today, because holy crap, I'm not opening any windows or curtains or anything because we don't need any sunlight in here. So, hi, how are you? It's really hot here. Did I tell you that? Anyway, that's not why we're here today. We are here today to talk to Kathy Ware. She is the former owner of Wild Hare Fibers. She is the current owner of Wild Hare, or Designs by Wild Hare, excuse me. She is also going to be a instructor and a vendor at Applique Getaway this year. You might have seen her from some of the stuff we've done for Applique Getaway, but I'm going to bring her in and we're going to talk about a variety of things, and who the heck knows where this conversation is going to go. It's going to be fun. You'll love it. Trust me. How's that for an intro, Kathy?
Sounds fabulous. For the record, we had one day last year, 114 degrees.
See,
I have to tell you, you can't even move. You just sit and vegetate. That's all.
Oh yeah, that's. I mean, for us,
in Oregon, we don't generally have air conditioning. So
no, we don't normally here either. I have central air because I hate being hot.
Yeah, well, we don't have it. So it was a very unpleasant that day, but I mean, the days on either side were too. It literally burned plants, literally burned them. So.
Yeah, it's not. Well, that was the one thing when I was buying my house. I was like, I don't care. It needs to have a basement and it needs to have a garage and it needs to have air conditioning.
Yeah.
I don't care about anything else. Oh, hi, Kitty.
Oh, yeah, that's Bobbin. She likes to stand on the back of my chair, so I'm sure she'll visit off and on.
That's fine. We've had pets as guests before. They don't say a lot, but they're cute.
Yes.
So I have a lot of things I want to talk to you about, but the first thing that I want to talk to you about is you had a business. You had a business called Wild Hare Fibers. Did I get that right?
Wild Hare Fiber.
Wild Hare Fiber, yeah. And you ran that for a number of years and you were fairly successful. You know, you were successful at it and it did well. And I want to ask you two things. The first one is, why fibers? Because I know I did not realize that was as big a market and as extensive a business climate as it is.
Oh, it's massive.
Yeah. What attracted you to that? Why did you decide that's what you wanted to do?
Basically, years ago, in my former life, I was a senior mortgage loan processor, and then I became an underwriter. And I worked for Countrywide Home Loans, who went under. And so I got laid off, and never, ever had I been laid off in my entire life. Not something I recommend if you can avoid it. When I changed jobs, it was always on my terms.
Sure.
And so it was actually kind of a really personal thing. I didn't expect it. But so I went back to school. What am I going to do? I went back to school. I drove a school bus, technically part-time, but basically full-time hours, driving a school bus, picking up extra stuff. I went back to school to begin with, picked up some credits at the local community college. And then because I'd previously gone to college for a while when I first got out of high school. So I took those credits and went and did a degree completion program through George Fox University, which is a private college or university here in Oregon, and graduated with my degree in social and behavioral studies, and I still couldn't get a job. So it's just the climate here, the whole mortgage industry collapsed. So it wasn't that I didn't have skills. I had lots of skills, but nobody knows what those skills are. And we'd entered into the age that we're firmly in now, that, you apply for a job and it goes off into la land, and you never hear from anybody, and there's nobody you can follow up with. So it's this constant, sending information out. And it was tremendously depressing. So partially during that time, a girlfriend of mine had been kind of getting into this. It was recycled wool, and you went to Goodwill or secondhand stores, garage sales, and you picked up wool jackets and skirts, tore them apart, washed them to felt them, and then they were used in wool applique, which was becoming a huge thing. It was also used, you cut it in strips for primitive and traditional rug hooking. I've always been interested, Wild Hare fiber, the fiber part works well because I sew, I quilt, I knit, I know how to spin, so I make yarn. Everything that I do is, I've done art quilts. It's multi-layers, but generally speaking, there's fiber involved in it somewhere. So I basically, my very first show that I did was at a quilt show, and I didn't sell hardly anything. It was 3 days, but during those 3 days I networked, and I always talk to people. You can't walk past my booth or table without me saying hi and looking you in the eye. So I was very busy visiting those 3 days. And by the time I was done, I found myself, I'd agreed to learn how to dye. I agreed to see if I could find sources for wool to dye. And I already had a shop, a local shop, that wanted me to teach classes in wool applique. So I'm like, So I went home and talked to my husband, and I said, hey, this looks like something I might be able to pursue. And I can't keep doing what I'm doing because I'm not making any money at it. And so it was either that or continue to go try to find jobs in the just the regular market. And my husband's a sweetie, and he says, go ahead and do it. It's what you love, and we'll make it work. And that's what I did. So on very little money, I couldn't even get family members to invest in me. It's like, you don't have a plan, you don't have enough to start, you're not going to make it. I'm like, yeah, right, whatever. So I started the business, and I don't even know, $10,000-$15,000 is what I had, and started doing shows, and 50% of everything I made went in the bank, and I just started moving forward, and I constantly was doubling and tripling what I was doing, and I operated for the first 5 years, I operated my business 100% on cash. I used credit cards as a backup, but I didn't use credit cards to buy products. All my product was paid with my debit card. I owned everything. And then, of course, as you get busier and bigger, you need to dabble a little bit in that so that you have enough. I had doubled the size of my booth. So I'm doing shows further and further. I ended up all over the country, teaching classes, doing shows, and finally got to a point just before COVID where I have asthma. Somewhere along the line, I brutalized my voice, I think, over time between sports and coaching and yelling at kids. So this is how I sound now. But with the asthma, I couldn't be around the wool like I was before. And so I had made the decision to start to transition, and I had discovered machine embroidery. And so as I transitioned, COVID hit, and I literally spent the 2 solid years, 2020 and 21, doing nothing but selling off all this massive inventory, because I didn't just have wool. I had all the products that go along with it, kits and tools. And literally for 2020, I made more in 2020 than I did in 2019, just because I was selling off all of this stuff. So basically, I decided that I was going to learn to digitize, and I was going to do machine embroidery. I could stay home. I didn't have to travel all over the planet if I didn't want to, and I didn't have to ship stuff. So I wanted to get out of this labor-intensive, time-consuming retail market and enter into something that was digital online that I could do until I drop. So
Mm-hmm.
it carries me more into old age. Not that I'm there yet, but I say this: I have the gray hair, but I do not have.
That doesn't mean anything. I went gray
No,
at
you know what? It
35,
doesn't.
so
So, and I don't have the old age attitude. I don't have the old age issues as far as well. Some days I don't have as much energy as I'd like, but generally speaking, I'm
mm-hmm.
always on the go. I talk 90 miles an hour, and if you ask me questions, I want to share everything I know with you. That's always been the type of person I am. So I've transitioned. I was Wild Hare Fiber. I'm now Designs by Wild Hare. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I liked I'm known as Wild Hare. So if I kept it in the name, I felt that I could do a little bit of rebranding and bring myself more modern and deal with the digital. And then I occasionally have different embroidery blanks available for sale. So we're still working on getting my website presentable. It's live, but there's not much on it. But
Mm-hmm.
I have 3 more patterns in testing. So once those come free, I'll have 4 items on my website.
Hey, you got to start where you
You
got
know
to
what?
start,
Well,
right?
by the time I go to Applique Getaway, I hope to have 50 or more. So,
There you go.
once you get going and start to figure things out, it is kind of a fast track. I enjoy it. And I get to teach. And with Applique Getaway, it's going to be fabulous because I like people. And
Mm-hmm.
at times I hate them.
Yeah, I get that too.
We all go through that when we do sales and stuff. But
I
so
get that.
that's kind of my background and why I've transitioned and kind of jumped.
And I have questions. And the
Okay.
first one is because I'm always curious about this. I've named a bunch of businesses, a bunch
Mhm.
of products. It's a pain in the behind every
Uh-huh.
time. Why Wild Hair? What is the genesis of that?
That's a good question. So basically, the very first thing I got into, not as a business, it was just something I learned how to spin. So I spin
Mm-hmm.
fiber into yarn. And to begin with, it was wool. And then in Oregon, we have this 3-day, 4-day event called Black Sheep Gathering. And it's held in Eugene, which is about 2 hours from here.
Mm-hmm.
But it's got classes and all sorts of livestock, but they're all fiber producing animals. And
Oh,
so the
okay.
first, and then there's that one, and then there's another one. No, it just went out of my mind. I'll think of the name. It's in September, close in the Portland metro area. It's in a town called Canby, but the same idea. So that's the one that my husband and I were dinking around, and we had our youngest with us, and we went to this fiber thing. And there's lots of vendors. See, I was always looking for stuff to spin, and you
Sure.
could get all sorts of fabulous fibers, and it's already hand dyed, and then I just could go home and spin it. So we go into the livestock area because Emily wanted to pet all the sheep and the goats, and they had Angora rabbits.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're looking at Angora rabbits, and this very nice lady was talking about the German Angora rabbits. And the Germans get really big. They're big
Mm-hmm.
rabbits, but if you shear them, you can shear them. We were shearing it 3 to 4 times a year. They
Oh my
produce their
goodness.
wool very rapidly. You're looking at the length of what you're getting and the crimp that's on it as far as how good the fiber is. So long story short, we end up with an Angora rabbit at home. And he was Prince Charming. Emily picked him out, and we got him so that Emily was going to help and help take care of him and be kind of a project for her. Well, that didn't work out. So you know who has to take care of the rabbit is me. And I got really good at working and trimming. And the next thing you know, you have to have another rabbit, and then you have another rabbit, and then we have to have baby rabbits because we thought if we've got it, we might as well go through that so Emily would be able to experience that. She's the youngest of 4 kids, but I have a gap. And so
Mm-hmm.
that part worked well. So basically, I ended up with rabbits on my husband screened in. We were in an old Victorian house. He screened in the front porch, and we had cages that he had set up the whole setup, and we had cages and Angora rabbits on our front porch. So that's where the Wild Hare fiber came from. I came up with it.
Okay.
I I came up with the name. I really liked it. I found a design I really liked that I used kind of as my logo for years. And then when we ended up having to move, and so we weren't keeping the rabbits at that point. But I still had that name. Well, as time went on, I got laid off. I have to start a business, and I already had that name, especially in my mind. And I thought, you know what, that'd work really well. So that's what I registered to get my EIN number, and it's what I've used up until recently. I'm now Designs by Wild Hare, and the logo is a little different, but it's still cool and funky.
Right. Well, I was interested because, like I said,
Yeah.
I've named a lot of things, and I'm always curious why people pick the names they pick. And I also really I want to know, just because it's not, or maybe more people do this than I think, how the heck did you get into spinning? I mean, are there like a lot of people that do that I just don't know?
You know what?
I guess I think, like, old timey kind of, with the spinning wheel, like little house on the prairie sort of thing,
Well, I'm in Oregon, and Oregon does a lot of natural type stuff. And spinning is one of those things, I have been a maker since I was in 5th grade. And I went to a Catholic grade school, and Sister Cecilia in 5th grade thought all the girls needed to learn how to crochet. So in 5th grade, we all learned how to crochet. I can't tell you how many Afghans and washcloths and everything else I've made over the years. But what's cool about it is that I learned that I could sit down and like if it's a crochet, and take my hook and some yarn and end up with something, a finished item that was attractive, that I was proud of. I was excited when I completed it. So all the steps of things when you enter into any kind of a project or task was there. And so for me, that's what making did for me. It provided me the opportunity to use a skill, improve on a skill, but I was making something. Typically I almost gave everything away, but I got to make something. And then I'm, I have a little bit of attention problems. And so I would be like, oh, look at this, I want to know how to macrame, or, oh, look at this, I want to know how to do that. And so I have a very broad spectrum of things that I know how to do. At one point, we bought an old Victorian house in West Lynn, which is a suburb of Portland, and we had to redo the bathroom. Well, I couldn't find tiles I liked. And long story short, we ended up buying a used kiln and a box of tiles. And we had, anytime a family member visited, they had to sit at the dining room table and paint some tiles. I found a border print I liked and said, as long as whatever's on here is what you paint, go for it. And we used that as the backsplash all around part of the Victorian. We had the little toilet room next to the tub room.
Sure.
But all around the where the sink was and along where the tub was. So, and then that went on to, okay, now we're going to do ceramics, and we're going to pour molds. And I had a wheel. We would take the wheel in when it was raining and yucky out. Doug would put a tarp down in our living room, and we'd bring the wheel in, and Emily'd sit on my lap, and we'd spin and make pots.
Well, I like that, because that's something that I found that a lot of business owners, they have that kind of, if you want to know something or you want to do, you just go figure out how to do it. You don't which I think is an interesting trait, and probably someone's done a study on that I haven't found yet. But there's something about, it's just kind of like, well, I didn't like what was available, so I decided I'd make my own. And that's also, I think, crafters and makers are like that too. A lot of the people that, and I liked what you said, and I want to talk about that for just a minute. When you said, when you learned how to crochet, you made something and you got a finished product. And I think that, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, because I'll put my hand up freely that I am not in any way a crafter, but there's something about having a finished thing at the end of it that I think is part of the attraction. Am I right about that?
It is. And, I think a lot of reasons why we create, men or women, but obviously I'm a woman, I know a lot of women,
Right.
is it gives you a sense of value. It makes you feel good about yourself. I
Sure.
did this. I have a skill. I know how to do this. As you get better and better, it's like, hey, I'm an expert. I can teach classes in
Mm-hmm.
this. For a period of time, I taught knitting as part of the local high school had, I don't know if they still do, but as my older kids were going through, they had a fiber arts class. Only
Oh, neat.
mostly seniors took it, but during the class they sewed some squares together and made a small quilt. They learned how to dye some yarn, and then they learned how to knit. They did some embroidery type stuff. They did batik. They really got to learn a lot of different things. But each time they did something, it was a finished item. And I have to
Mm.
tell you, when I sat and I went in and I was a helper, and with the teacher was a friend of mine. So you'd have a class of like 30 kids in it, and it's almost half and half, boys and girls, and most of them are seniors. And I'll tell you, the boys are the ones that just amazed me. Teach them how to knit, and they just absolutely went nuts. They got their
Mm-hmm.
first little hat done, and just a stocking cap, and they're immediately over dyeing more yarn and getting ready because they got to make another one because their friend wants one. And it was
Sure.
just, and what I learned is, because I do have I'm ADHD, but I don't take any medicine for it or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but I've learned skills along the way. And when I went back to school to finish my degree because I'd lost my job, I'm looking at 4 hours every Tuesday night of having to be in a class. And at times it drove me nuts. But I could take my knitting. It was fine with the instructor. I took my knitting and I'd sit and knit and then take notes
Mm-hmm.
as I went. I got a ton done. So what helps, I learned you can't knit, and I'm sure it's the same with crochet and some other things, but you cannot knit and be upset. You cannot knit and think bad thoughts. You
Mm-hmm.
can't knit and feel the full weight of your depression or anxiety or what the burden that you're dealing with. So it's a fabulous skill to be able to
Mm-hmm.
sit down and do something. I could glance at the TV and listen, but generally I have to watch what I'm doing.
Sure.
But then all of a sudden, I have this finished hat. I learned how to knit socks. Oh my God, I love to knit socks. One sock, because then I've
One
seen it.
sock.
I don't, well, if I'm using certain yarn, I get the first one done, and then it's like, I don't want to do the second because I've already done it. So I decided, if I ever have time again and my hands will do it and I start knitting socks again, I will have pairs of mismatched socks. Because for
Well, that,
me,
why not? Whatever
but
works for you.
it's, for me, it's like, okay, I've done this. All right, what's next? It's I can't sit down and make 30 of the same thing. I can if I'm planning on it, but I can't make the same thing like for years. It would drive me nuts.
Yeah, I get that. But I think that one of the things that you said is really interesting, and I want to touch on it just for a
Mm-hmm.
minute, was the whole idea of we tend to think that men are artists, like they paint or they sculpt or whatever it is, but we don't think of them as crafters. And I don't know if that's because we don't see them as much.
I think it's historic. You look back at
Yeah.
history. I will be honest with you. I don't think of men as artists. Generally, I gravitate towards women because we
Mm-hmm.
create things and we make things and we are on the fly. We don't have to have a pattern. We don't have to have somebody tell us what to do. Not that gifted men that are capable of doing those things. Don't
Mm-hmm.
want to detract, but my husband, who wanted to learn how to crochet, and I showed him, and he crochets doilies with thread. I'm like, oh my gosh, I would never ever want to do that. It's technical. You have to read a chart. It
Mm-hmm.
totally spoke, but he has to be told. He's not going to sit down, write his own pattern. If I need something done, I have to be very specific. And especially if he's cutting something out, I have to threaten him because he is not careful. So if I had him cut out pieces for a quilt, it would just drive me insane because nothing would line up.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd have to tell him what colors if I wanted something made, but I want these colors. So, I think a lot of times we help other people to be creative, even if
Right.
that creation is that they with their hands made something. It's not necessarily that they thought of the thought or the
Sure.
instructions, or they get to a point where, okay, this isn't working, and that just gets set aside. Whereas I think, and there's women too, but I think most women look at it and it's like, by God, I'm going to figure this out, and you come up with workarounds. I belong to so many groups, and some of them are the different bags and the popular bag
Mm-hmm.
patterns. And I read over and over again how, I was tired, so the lining's on inside out, but I figured out a fix so I could get everything attached, but then I did this, but I figured out a fix. So she had 3 times during the process of making this bag that she hadn't read the instructions clearly, or misunderstood, or
Mm-hmm.
just flat out had a brain fart. But she put out a really cute, very nice looking bag. So I think that, women have a much easier time, and we don't see it as being necessarily a big deal being able to do that. It's just how we operate. Because what do you do when the kids need this and this, and you have to juggle, the kids' schedule and the family schedule, and you wanted to do something. And there's so many talents that women have simply because we may be the caretaker of the kids, and even if we're sharing the job, we still are the ones that tend to be doing those types of things, and it just
Uh-huh.
feeds right into what we do in a way. I mean, it's my opinion. I know things
Well,
have
and I
changed.
mean, I was just laughing at you saying that,
Yeah.
I wouldn't let my husband cut out fabric because nothing would be the same size or the right shape
Mhm.
or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, that's totally me.
Yeah.
You wouldn't let me cut out fabric either because I would last about 5 seconds because
Yeah.
I can't cut a straight line or draw a straight line if you give
Yeah.
me a ruler. It's just
Yeah.
not possible for me.
Well,
But
when we met before we got married, he had more finished quilts. He broke his back, and so for a period of time when he was younger, he was basically down, or
mhm.
once he was up, but still unable to work. And his grandmother taught him how to sew. And for a while,
Well, there you go.
he made his own shirts, button down shirts, the lot. But he would make quilts, but he didn't necessarily follow the instructions. And for him, it didn't have to be perfect. So it didn't have to be totally straight. If he
Right.
had to pull something over, or he went to quilt it and it was off, he didn't care. He ended up with his finished quilt, and he was totally fine with that and pleased with that. So part of it is, I grew up as a young adult and took quilt classes, and I hated quilting, liked sewing the tops, but
Mhm.
back then you couldn't machine quilt. That was frowned upon. You had to do it by
Right.
hand. It
Hand
had to be so
quilting.
many stitches per inch. And I'm like, this is not the way I'm built. And so for
Mhm.
a long time, I had containers with unfinished tops in them because there's no way I was going to sit down and do that.
Mhm.
So the
That's
rules
very
have changed
painstaking work.
considerably. Well, we see so many more men in the quilting industry, for one.
Mhm.
You have a lot more men that are out and designing patterns. They're vocal. They're teaching.
Mhm.
It's totally acceptable to have. And that's your business. This is what you're doing. There's men that are experts. We have a guy in Oregon who's an expert in quilts of the 60s and 70s, that whole genre and the
Oh, wow.
fabrics. And he has a museum. And since COVID, I'm not sure what all is available, but
Mhm.
um, men look at things differently than women. And
Well, I think that's true.
I find that not all, but a lot of the patterns that are designed by men are more technical. They're more geometric. Um, but that doesn't mean you can't find a man who's designed a applique
Mhm.
quilt that's absolutely gorgeous. But it is a predominantly female industry.
Well, I think a lot of it is I mean, yes, I think you're right. Most of, quilting and embroidery and all that kind of stuff definitely is very female heavy, which I think that's because women were encouraged to do it more than men, maybe. But anyway, I want to get one comment here, and I'm sorry we got the dreaded Facebook user, but apparently there's a vote for mismatched socks. It says
Yes.
mismatched socks are the in thing now.
They
So
are. Well, I think
you're
there's a
on
lot of people like
trend.
me. There's a lot of people
Yep.
like me. Well, it's fabulous when you knit a sock, because when it's done, it's like, oh my gosh. My very first pair of knitted socks, I still have. They were made. You use what's called superwash wool
Uh-huh.
yarn, and it's already been pressure treated, so they're not going to shrink, and they don't
Okay.
felt, and they won't felt. And so you can wear them, you can wash them. Otherwise, just the friction in your sweaty feet would cause them to felt. And when it
Right.
felts, the fibers bind together as it's being felted. You need heat, friction, moisture.
Mm-hmm.
So as those bind, it tightens and forms a fabric. And the
Mm-hmm.
more you do it, the more it tightens. Wool will actually continue to felt for its entire existence as
Wow.
that, whatever that piece is. So you don't want socks to do that, but it's fabulous if you want to knit a giant bag and then felt it, because you're going to knit a bag that's like this big, and it's going to come out to be but it's a texture thing, and it's a transformation, and so we all do
Mm.
things differently. One thing that you had said earlier is men. We see men as artists and women as crafters, and
Mm-hmm.
again, I think that is was started as a male perception, um, because what women do, um, although to start with, women, what they did was to improve what was going on in the home, whether you were
Yeah,
poor or
I
rich.
think that's
You
that's a
did
fair
things. It was
assessment.
a way to create something from something that didn't have any use anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and you were able to turn it into something that was functional. But there were no patterns. Those women were making their own
Mm-hmm.
designs. Some of it was primitive. Then you go to wealthier homes, and you've got ladies that learned how to do all sorts of fancy types of embroidery and things. But the woman of the house would have done all the linens,
Mm-hmm.
as far as the decorative stitching and things like that. So I prefer to think of women as makers.
Yeah,
Um,
I think
I
that's
think makers. I like the term maker. Artist has a connotation, and it's fine if you're an artist. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But I think maker's more all encompassing of what
mm,
we bring to the table. There are people that just quilt, or that just sew, or just knit. But generally, I find most ladies that quilt actually knit. There's a lot of double dipping, that you do this, but
mm-hmm.
you also do this. But maker allows you, it really encompasses everything that you do, and whatever you're putting together, that you are creative, and that you are creating something. There's something finished when you're done. Whether you're selling it or giving it away is irrelevant. And an artist,
Right.
when you think of an artist sells their work. An artist is creating their art in whatever format, but art, I think of as something that's going to last over time, over a longer
Mm-hmm.
period of time. As makers, we can make things that are going to last hundreds of years, but we can also make things that are going to be enjoyed immediately and used, and probably aren't
Mm-hmm.
going to make it past a year or two, or up to 5, or whatever. um, that doesn't mean that what I've just made isn't necessarily a piece of art. But I
Right.
think maker, I think I hate the term crafter. I absolutely hate it. I
Well, I
feel,
think there's value judgments
yeah,
that kind of go with artist or crafter. There's
yeah.
like one is special and exclusive and should go in a museum, and the other one is
Mm-hmm.
popsicle sticks that you're putting together with glue and
If you call
googly
me a
eyes.
crafter, I'm thinking you're
Yeah.
saying that I use popsicle sticks. That's exactly what I see.
Yeah,
It's like,
and
wait,
that's not true,
yeah,
but
I'm gluing
it's the
yarn into
kind of
circles on a
cultural
piece of
value
paper.
judgment. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
So, I think I actually like maker too. I think that's a I well, if I ever get to do the show I want to do, I'm going to do a show that's called Create Your Way, and it's going to be all about makers, but that's
Yeah.
another thing.
Well,
So I
I
don't want to
think
get started on that.
well, and maker encompasses everybody, male or female
Yeah.
or anything in between. A maker is a maker. That doesn't, you don't have to be a certain type of person or certain type of, color,
Well, actually, I
nationality.
hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah,
But you're right. It's kind of
but
more
it's a strong
inclusive.
word. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like, I'm a maker. Ooh, what do you make? I mean,
Well,
it's
and
the media.
that's, yeah, if you're a maker, what is it
Uh-huh.
that you make?
So what
And
is it
maker
that
can
you do?
also
I mean,
extend to any kind of
immediately,
creative pursuit.
exactly. It creates interest, and it's like, I'm a maker.
I like it.
Yes, I can be a painter, and yes, because I have two paintings in the house. One's 5 by 7 feet, and one's 6 by 5, I think.
Oh,
When I
nice.
went back to school to finish my degree, when I lost my job, I went to the community college, and I took classes for a year through the community college, and I got a huge amount of what I'd taken before was transferred. And but after the first term, I about died. 3 classes, so I'm going full time, and I'm like, I can't. It was such a tremendous drain. I was like, I can't believe learning is so hard at this point. And I thought, of course, I was 32. I know everything. I don't need to go back to school. So after that first term, I immediately signed up for an art class. And every term after that, I took an art class. I found an instructor I really liked. He was fabulous. He did off the wall stuff. Basically, it was a drawing class. But at the end, to say drawing, it was really more multifaceted, because I did a self-portrait with a tennis ball and paint. I did drawings with a pencil eraser that I'd sharpened to a point in ink, and you do basically dots and clusters on how that goes together. And then our final project at the end of the term, again, I took it to 2 different times. It was summer term. We literally took over a hall in one of the buildings and put up our large canvases, and we took pictures that we had taken, and projected them onto the wall, just used charcoal to get rough outlines, and we painted them on the canvas, but on the wall. And that was that was the summer art show, so to speak. But we're standing on chairs and different things, and painting these huge things. So I found that art for me was, and again, making, but to me, that was art. I was using more traditional things to do more traditional skill. But I got straight A's.
Well, there you go.
So when I went back to school between the community college and then Fox's program, I got straight A's, and I did my homework, and I didn't have a problem doing it. And I was able to focus because I had something to look forward to on a daily basis. And I watched this, especially the first painting, I watched it come to life, and I'm like, wow. At one point, I had a wicker basket. Basically, I did a painting of my spinning wheel with roving on it, which is the fibers that have all been rolled out, so they're in the same direction. And then it goes up into the spindle. It does its twisty thing, and now you have yarn coming out. And then I had a thing of yarn from it hanging on the other side. Well, I have a basket with some knitting needles in front of it. And I'm like talking to the instructor. I'm like, how do I do a basket? And you know what? He couldn't do it. He's like, I don't know. And so I would do some stuff to it. And what do you think? And he says, and he just shrugged his shoulders. And by the time I put so many layers on that, and every time I go back, I do something different. It's an awesome basket. I'm very proud of it. It turned out real good.
I love it.
But it also showed that, you know what? I mean, it's one of the most happy times, one of the happy times in my life. I loved that class. But part of it, I really enjoyed him, and we clicked. I was the oldest in the class, which I found, even being in my early 30s, to be the oldest in the class teachers treat you a little bit differently. And so
Sure.
we visited a lot.
Mhm.
Or at lunch break, we'd go play Frisbee out on the field next to the building we were in. But being able to work on a piece and then have him say, wow, that I couldn't have done that. That
That's
was
pretty cool.
fabulous. I couldn't have done that. I was like, wow, that's really cool. And you do. It's like that validation when somebody buys your product or they
Mhm.
give you compliments. Accept those compliments. You need to look at it. We look at our things so critical. And when you look at something that you've done, if someone else likes it, don't take anything away from that. Thank
Right.
you. Thank you for saying that. I'm
Yeah.
glad you like it.
Oh yeah, as the queen of self-criticism, I
Yeah, you know what?
fully
You got to leave that at the door. Life's
never
too
have learned
short.
to do that. But anyway,
Life's too short, Christine.
I know. But I want to talk about, we've only
Yeah.
got a little bit of time left here, but I
Okay.
want to talk about something else because
Okay.
we had a discussion previously about trade shows and the things
Uh-huh.
that really annoy us that people do at trade shows, not necessarily
Oh.
attendees, but other
Mhm.
vendors.
Uh,
And I want to talk about that a bit because I think a lot of vendors don't realize the things that they do that screw up their chances of success at a show.
I agree. I agree.
And
At my peak with Wild Hare Fiber, I was doing 18 to 20 shows a year,
yeah,
which is a lot when you start figuring
it is.
out and travel. And a lot was close by, but I traveled to Washington State, to California, to Nevada, to Colorado, went to do a show in Nebraska. I was all over the place.
Mhm.
And I just lost my train of thought.
You were talking about your experience that you'd done a bunch of
Oh,
shows for a
got
long
it.
time and you
Got it.
traveled a lot and all that.
So what I noticed, because I started out doing shows, I'd have a booth. So you have a 10 by 10
Mhm.
ish booth. And they're mainly quilt shows.
Yeah.
And local ladies within, a broad area, but and I don't even know how many people came, but you got to a point, you got a feel for what you were going to make.
Sure.
But what I started to notice, and even as I expanded and did shows that were further afield, I did shows that weren't necessarily quilt shows. They would typically have a collection. They may be traveling with it. They got on loan from some curator, but generally it was a sewing, quilting type show. And it was all about the vendors and coming and spending some money, and vendors taught the classes. And so there were these big kind of, and those were in much bigger venues. And I did a lot of those, taught classes, gave talks, went all over the place. But what I noticed is I would be doing well at a show, and I sold hand-dyed wool. I have a specialty product. I wasn't pulling down the numbers that if I was a fabric store and I was selling fabric stores were making double and triple of what I was bringing in. So I had to work really hard for what I had to pay for expenses. Basically, half of whatever was made always went back to product, and then what was left had to pay for expenses. And for some shows, by the time that was all said and done, I might have made between $200 and $500, and I just spent 3 days at a show and a travel day on either side of it with the hotel and the whole 9 yards. So really, it was an expensive advertising dollar.
Yeah.
Although I got people, and my online business boomed because of it. But what I noticed at several shows, I can just picture it in my mind, is it would get boring, or I had help. A lot of times I'd rope one of my girls into coming and helping in the booth, my sister. And so I get to walk around. And so I take a break and then start walking around. I visit with people. And all I heard was all this negativity and complaining. Nobody's buying anything. They just walk by. They won't look at me. I walked past booths where ladies were reading books. They had their back to the actual walkway, the aisle where, so the front of their booth, they had their back, or they were sideways. They were on the phone. They were either
Mm-hmm.
talking or playing a game. So, when you're doing any kind of a show, whether you have a small table at just a local craft show or you're doing a very large show, the rules really are the same. Is you are your business. And when
Mm-hmm.
somebody walks by your little plot of land that you've paid for, they want to see something interesting. And ladies, when we shop and we go to this is me. If I go to a quilt show, let's say a quilt show, I want to see really awesome things. I don't want to see the same thing in every booth. I appreciate booths that are different. I got compliments at multiple shows in Colorado because I sold wool, and this woman came up. She says, "I don't do wool, but you have the best booth in the show." And
That's cool.
that was my goal, is I want the best looking booth in the show.
Mm-hmm.
I had tons of samples. I had lots of product. Most shows I went with $20,000 to $30,000 worth of product to
Mm-hmm.
pack into a 10 by 20. Um, and no, I didn't sell that much, but I was not going to run out. And I want a variety. But when somebody walks past your booth and you're looking at, and they're doing okay, I don't really want to look over here because if I do, I'm going to have to go in and buy something.
Right.
So as people walk by, I say hi to every single person that walks by. Hi, how are you? And it's okay
Mm-hmm.
if they keep going, and I'm smiling.
Yeah.
I'm always smiling. It doesn't matter if I have not sold a dime. I'm dying inside, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
smiling. And I say hi to everybody. And almost everybody will stop and say, hi, how are you? Enjoying the show? Yeah. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know anything about, wool applique and then sometimes they just were closed. And so I left it alone. But part of the time, those people came back.
Mm-hmm.
And it came in the booth. Hey, sorry I didn't stop, but I was doing this or that. Or they pop in the booth. It's always a hi. And you're paying attention to people that maybe nobody paid attention to them yet
Mm-hmm.
today. Maybe nobody said hi or made them feel welcome or shared something with them. I always had these strips of wool that were too narrow to really do a lot with for
Mm-hmm.
me, because I did everything on a large scale. But ladies that did either the rug hooking or they were doing the wool
Mm-hmm.
applique, a strip that's only 2 inches wide, but it's going to be 20 to 40 inches long. That was long enough. Is enough to do all sorts of things with. So I would
Sure.
take those and roll them and tie them with embroidery floss. And I have a big basket and maybe all these colors and textures of hand-dyed wool in this
Oh,
basket. I have
that's
these little
cool.
rolls. And so people walk by or they pop into the booth. Hey, would you like one? Or I popped one in their bag when they bought something.
Mm-hmm.
Kids are bored to death walking at those shows. I had boys and girls walk in and I say, hey, you want to come here? You want one? The boys were like, I remember this one boy, really? Yeah, pick one. What's your favorite color? And he held it like this.
Uh-huh.
And his mom came in and she's mom, of course, stopped bothering the lady. And I said, oh no, he's not bothering me. And he looks at his mom and he says, this is the most special thing I've ever been given. And
Aw.
she was like, oh Lord. And I'm thinking, wow. And you
Okay.
know what? So I mean, it's somewhere in between, but all I did was notice him. And
Right.
I said, it's really boring, huh? I said, if I were you, I'd be bored. I understand. So we
Well, and
visited a little bit.
I mean,
And you know
somebody
what?
got him.
Well, and he now had something to carry with him
Sure.
the rest of the time. And somebody went out of their way to give that to him
Yeah.
and notice that he existed,
Yeah,
which,
and having watched kids at trade shows too, and
uh-huh.
how,
But,
and and the only thing their parents are doing is going, stop that, don't touch
well,
that,
they
don't
didn't
go
ask to
there, don't,
go. And usually it's mom, although I've had dads with the kids. And it's because that was the only way for them to be able to go, is the kids
Sure.
had to come.
Kids had to
So
come
for
too.
me, it's like but one of my early shows was in a small town quilt show, Quilt Guild, and I did not do well. But we have nearby a Mennonite community, and it was in their area, and the ladies did a bake sale, and oh man, the stuff in the bake sale was,
oh, I bet.
Oh, it was fabulous. And there was fresh cinnamon rolls every morning that you could buy. And it was awesome. But I had these little girls floating around. So I turned around one day and I had these bundles of fabric, or I know it was wool. And I literally just pulled out of my stock, opened up packages, and they sat down and I showed them how to do the wool applique. And they did some simple stitching down of just some shapes onto a piece of wool. And when they were done, went and showed their mom. They were thrilled. I said, just ask your mom to help you and make a pincushion out of it or something. So it's when shows were super dead, or I needed a conversation piece, I'd bring my spinning wheel and I'd sit at the opening to my booth and spin. And boy, you want to get your booth full.
Oh yeah.
And sure. the men will stand about 30 feet away. And they're like,
just and watching it. Yeah.
It's it's almost like, I don't know if you've watched Doctor Who. It's like the weeping angels. If you close your eyes, they all of a sudden they're here and here. Yep. Next thing you know, he's standing right there. And so I tell him, I'd stop what I was doing. I'd tell him how it worked. Kids would come watch. I sat them on my lap and I did the feet and helped with their hands, and they got to take away a piece of yarn they'd made. So
what I love is there's interactive stuff there, which interactive is always huge. If you can educate somebody or help them get a feel for whatever you're doing. But the other thing is just when most people have a bad show, what they do is what you were talking about in the beginning. Oh, this is so boring. There's nobody in my booth. I'm going to read a book. I'm going to play a game. I'm going to sit here and frown at everybody. I'm going to eat a bag of chips, whatever it is.
No,
instead honestly, of trying to pull people in or interact with them.
If your thing is knitting, if your thing, whatever your thing is, most ladies do some kind of handwork. Not all. I know some people are totally on the machine, and that's cool. But if you do something by hand, take it and sit and do that, because you're making it doesn't matter if you're knitting and what you're selling is, sublimation equipment. It's the fact that you're doing something, and like-minded people are going to come and visit you, and they will come past that barrier into the booth. And all of a sudden, now you can talk, hey, have you tried doing this or doing that? Or they may now have the courage to ask. Because, a lot of women, when they go and shop, aren't necessarily comfortable actually asking what they want, how to do this, how to do that, what is this. Sometimes in a booth, especially with equipment, it's all male salespeople, and they are very, I don't want to say in your face, but they're definitely more charged.
Of a hard sell a little bit.
Well, kind of. They're charged for the sale. Some of them are very good and do very well with women, but I find a lot aren't. And I don't want a tough sell. I just want to know this information, and I don't want to feel like I now have to buy something from you because you spent 3 minutes explaining something.
Right.
And so I try to make it always that whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm selling, that I take the time and I bring stuff up. I ask the question and break the ice. If honestly, if you just say, hi, how's your day? And they start coming closer, you say, you know what? Have you done this before? No, most of the time it's like, no, I don't need another thing. That's all right. You feel free. Go touch it. It's very cool. It's all hand dyed. Tell them a little bit about what I did. And some would turn around, thank me, and leave. And others would turn around, and here's a little small purchase. And then some would find a kit or a pattern. Next thing you know, they're making a nice purchase because they've decided, this, maybe I do want to do this. So it's being a little intuitive about what your venue is, what you're doing. But if you're knowledgeable and you love what you do, people get that, and it's infectious. It's the best sales tool you have.
I agree. Well, and I also think too, one of the things that I've had people say to me is I'll say, well, do you have a little something they can do, like a little make and take or a little, and they'll say, oh, well, everything I can think of is so simple. And I'm like, you know what? I have had the simplest make and take in the world in my booth, something that I'm like, nobody's going to be interested in this. and I will have 10 people or, people a couple rows deep waiting to make this thing just because it's a thing they can take with them. And it's, completely simple.
You've given them permission to come in. Now they have an excuse to come in. They can ask whatever questions they want because they're sitting in the seat. So you've taken a lot of the scariness away. And it is. There's a few shows I did a make and take. Make and takes are tough because you have to have extra people in your booth. And so, it'll come back.
Well, the other thing that you said earlier about, I also liked about, you had the basket of the things of wool, the narrow strips, but long that people could, because we used to do that when I was at Enmart. We did that with cones of thread that were either a little older or had been, beat up somehow or something, and we'd put them in bargain bins, we called them. And people would scavenge through those things it was gold.
It's a deal. Well, and the other thing is, again, when you offer something to someone free, it's like it's a gift. So again, we feel more joyful about that. We didn't have to pay for it. How fabulous is that? And honest, ladies are going to do a lot. They're going to walk across the room. They're going to put you on their list of people to go to if there's something in it for them. And I don't mean that in a mercenary way, but we love freebies. We'll do a lot of stuff and not get paid if we get a freebie,
I would agree.
It across the board in our lives, whether we're making or not, freebies, they again help validate us that we are worthy of being given something. And especially nowadays when things are so expensive and yet we got to pay through the nose for everything. I randomly, when I ship out orders now, because I do, I have a lot of, I buy custom vinyl and then I turn around and resell it. I do the embroidery, so a lot it was it's the embroidery vinyl, and I also have some custom fabric that I turn around and resell. And there's times when I have pieces that I don't want to list them. What a pain, and they're small, and or I'll find stuff, or maybe I've got a customer and she's placed several orders in a row. I just did this with three ladies. They each got 4 pieces of sheets of printed vinyl, just random, pulled it out of my stash and just threw it in there. And
I used to do that too.
I just wrote bonus on a piece of painter's tape when I taped them. Well, I looked at these boxes because the rolls are taller than some of the flat, with the flat rate stuff. They got over a pound. All of a sudden, I'm having to ship 3 rolls of vinyl in a medium flat rate box. There's a lot of space in there, and it upsets me. It makes me feel bad. It's not a big box. There should be more in it. So I basically rolled the 4 sheets a little open, so it looked heftier, and I hope it would cut down on the amount of banging around it did in the package and threw them in there. But I do lots of random. I've always done that, and I really believe. And when I started producing the hand-dyed wool, I wanted to provide a product that anybody could afford, that ladies could turn around and make the same things that I did without it breaking the bank. So my wool was never at a true market rate. And it didn't mean, but my base fabric was the very best you could buy anywhere. And I did a lot of research and made sure that was the case. And ladies would pick it up at shows, and it was soft. Was coarse, it was soft. The colors were gorgeous, and I put out the best product that I could. But I always gave value, and because I think we should all be able to do things, and it's a way for me to be able to give. I still got to make a living. I still need some money in the bank, but I'm not here to make $1 million. I need to pay my bills, and I don't want to work super hard, which I did when I was traveling all the time. I'm telling you, there was not much sleep to be had, and I'm driving to all these different locations. And then when I get home, I'm hand dyeing all the wool, and having to cut everything down. I did a ton of kits,
It's a
that
lot.
kind of thing.
Well, I
So
really, really hate to cut this short, but we're almost at an hour, and I know us, and we could go for 2, but unfortunately, there are other things that need to get done today.
which is fine. Well, anybody that's
Yeah,
going to Applicate Getaway, come see me. I've got 2 classes.
definitely.
I'm talking about setting up a booth or your table and how to maximize your space to be eye catching, so that people will want to come see you. Um, uh, just stacking things on a table is not as eye catching as,
Right.
and when something looks nice and you've got the vertical space going, someone is more likely to step up and actually look at
Well,
things
and
than
don't
if
give all
it's a
your tips
pile.
away now, because people need to come to the class.
There you go. And then the other one's going to be on packaging and how
Yep.
packaging can help you with organization. It can help lower your theft at shows. Unfortunately, there is theft. I don't care what show you're doing, things get taken.
Yep.
And again, it leads into that. How does it look? But it's also an inventory management tool.
I would agree. Okay, so Designs by Wild Hare, like Kathy said, the site is a work in process, but go check it out because new designs are coming. You heard her, she said it.
Yeah.
And you can also go check out the Designs by Wild Hare Facebook group and just
Please
Google
do.
or just search
Yep.
Designs by Wild Hare and you can go join the group.
Yep.
And thank you so much for talking with me today.
Thank you for
were
having
great.
me.
You gave me a lot of good info. All right, y'all. I'm hitting end broadcast now before we go another hour.
Thank you.
Here we go.